this has been a rough week, I think it's fair to say. The big event of the week was that a full-scale invasion, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II, of Russia into Ukraine. What are your thoughts overall on what we've seen this week?
From the perspective of 6 months ago, this is a shock. From the perspective of what had been unfolding and what U.S. intelligence had been telling us, it wasn't that surprising when it came. But make no mistake, I think there's a real chance that this is going to be one of those moments like January 6th, like 9/11, like November 22nd, that echoes through history. That this kind of naked aggression could take place in Europe, that there could be the kind of emerging alliance that we have seen between Russia and China at the same time, means that we are in a very different world than many of us had thought we were headed into. The United States faces far graver challenges to its security than anyone would have thought likely even several years ago. And that's going to have ramifications, or needs to have ramifications, for almost every aspect of our national life. History has not ended. We are engaged in the kind of struggle that Lincoln spoke of, about whether government by the people, for the people, can long endure. That is a challenge domestically. That is a challenge globally. And anyone who thinks that it is not a challenge to their ability to flourish and profit as a business is making an enormous mistake. Because if we lose this struggle, it is not only our freedom and our security, but our prosperity that will be at peril.
The thoughts of all of us, I'm sure, are first with the men, women, and yes, children in Ukraine and what they are going through right now. And also the issues of the world order that you're raising, which are very profound. At the same time, this could have as well some profound economic consequences, particularly in a world, in the United States particularly, where we have a fair amount of inflation. What do you think the economic implications of this geopolitical crisis could be?
David, it's not going to be good. The direction is stagflationary. The direction is both to raise prices. We're seeing that in oil and energy and other commodity markets. The direction is also to reduce the level of demand and spending as those price increases sap purchasing power. So the very difficult job that the Fed had already made for itself by falling so far behind the curve has become that much more difficult with what we have seen. The danger is that team transitory will morph into team, it's a supply shock caused by oil, and find further excuse to avoid taking the necessary steps to contain inflation, and therefore postpone the ultimate reckoning and make more serious what needs to be done to contain inflation. The argument will be made that we can't afford restrictive policies. The problem is that we also can't afford an entirely unsustainable economic path that will ultimately set the stage for more economic distress, more pain, and more reduction in employment for the most vulnerable people in our society. This is a very serious moment, and it's a moment when policymakers have great responsibility to do things that are not easy.
Larry, I don't know if he's team transitory or not, but a respected economist, I know you respect him, a former classmate of yours, Paul KRUGMAN, weighed in on the inflation question, at least one aspect of it this week in the New York Times, where he essentially, if I can summarize it, took issues with what he called sort of technocrats who were distancing themselves from the Biden administration by criticizing some of the politically popular things that have been suggested, such as, for example, suspending the tax on gasoline, something you commented on last week on this program. I got a reaction from you, I saw on Twitter.
Paul's a brilliant guy, but on this, I think he is way off base. We would not be where we are if many of the economists who saw inflationary danger last summer had been prepared to speak up and express their concerns. By giving air to the bogus view that inflation has something to do with greed, distinguished economists are delaying the moment at which it will be confronted in a serious way.
So, Larry, let's take a moment here at the end to look forward to next week. We're going to have the first real State of the Union address from President Biden on Tuesday evening. That's always an important and, yes, challenging speech for a president. It's going to be particularly so, I suspect, this year, given what you've just been saying about inflation, but also the war in Ukraine. What would you like to hear from President Biden on Tuesday?
You know, I think there are things that are more important than the usual laundry list of policy proposals. I'm hoping to see a real change in tone from the president. President Biden needs to shift from being the protect the middle class from the pandemic president to being prepare America for the struggle ahead president. We don't need a middle class foreign policy now. We need a safe and secure world policy now. We don't need efforts to provide particular tax cuts or particular benefits to particular constituencies. We need a return to the spirit of President Kennedy, who at a moment when the country was challenged, asked America not what their country could do for them, but what they could do for their country. And so I hope that President Biden will recognize the gravity of the moment, will signal the necessary pivot given what is happening in Russia, what is happening in China, what is happening to the two of them together, and what is happening to our own democracy. Our own democracy, when a former president, just 13 months out of office, is calling the leader of a country who launches a world war a genius. That is a grave threat, and it points to a kind of polarization in our society that the president needs to address.